dies, and none knows to die. The rare one who knows to die is never born again. Meher Baba. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Thanks to beloved Baba and Jai Baba to all of you. We are now on session 3 of Meher Baba on death. So far, what we have covered, very broadly speaking, is that real death is the death of the mind, ego mind, death of separateness, death of ignorance, death of individuality. And when that death occurs, that is the real death, and that person has not to take another birth at all. The person merges with God and lives the life of God, as God. We have also seen that the ambiguity or the differences in different religious thought about whether there is only one birth and one death, or there are multiple births and multiple deaths. We say 84 lakhs of rebirths, reincarnation, and Baba has most brilliantly clarified the misinterpretation that has been going on for eons. Baba explains beautifully in God Speaks, and we have done that in session number 1. We also get to know from whatever we have done so far that crying and weeping and wailing at the time of death is sheer selfishness born out of ignorance of the true nature of the self. So what is required of us is that we broaden our view of what actually this life is all about and what this physical bodily death, when does it occur and what does it signify. Baba in one sentence says death is only an incident in life, but we give it too much of importance because of our ignorance, most importantly because of our attachment to that particular form and taking that particular form to be the truth or to be the reality. So now we start reading. This is session 3, as I said earlier, from Discourses, 7th edition, page number 304.
Subtitle: Effects of Untimely Death. Ordinarily, life in the physical body is terminated only when the sanskaras released for expression in that incarnation are all worked out. In some exceptional cases, the soul gives up its gross body before the working out of these sanskaras is completed. For example, an individual who commits suicide cuts short the period of his life artificially and thereby prevents the working out of those sanskaras that were released for fructification. When, due to untimely death, the sanskaras released for fructification are withheld from expression, the discarnate soul remains subject to the propelling force of these sanskaras even after the physical body has been discarded. The momentum of the sanskaras that were prevented from being worked out is retained even in life after death, with the result that the departed spirit greatly desires the things of the gross world.
All right. I'll read it again and we will try to understand. Ordinarily, life in the physical body is terminated only when the sanskaras released for expression in that incarnation are all worked out. We have done this earlier, that we come with a certain load of sanskaras, which are to be experienced, which are to be expended, spent. And once that load of sanskaras are experienced, for whatever be the reason, whatever be the excuse, the person drops his physical body and goes into the semi-subtle world, the astral world, experiencing the heaven or hell state. We've done that. The example that I would often give is that It's like we are going on a world tour and we have been given a certain sum of money and we have been given a prepaid return ticket. So you go roam around the entire world spending money, obviously, also sometimes earning money when you do a certain business wherever you are going. And then when the money which has been given to you for world tour is spent, completely spent, what do? You make use of your return ticket, which obviously is prepaid, and then you come back home. Exactly in the same manner, we come from our home, so to speak, astral world, semi-subtle world, with a load of karmas or samskaras or impressions to be experienced and utilized. In the process, we do experience, we also gather fresh samskaras, but those samskaras which we had brought for expression and experiencing at the time of birth, when they are all spent, when they are all completed, automatically, for whatever, as I say, whatever be the excuse of death, you go back home. So that is how the entire mechanism is made, that you come with a certain load, you spend it, and you go back home. So here Baba says, ordinarily, life in the physical body is terminated only when the sanskaras released for expression in that incarnation are all worked out. In some exceptional cases, the soul gives up its gross body before working out of these samskaras is completed. Very rarely it does happen that before the samskaras are all spent, the person drops the body. Baba gives the example, for example, an individual who commits suicide cuts short the period of his life artificially. The whole life was, let us say, 70 years. But at the age of 50, he commits suicide and artificially cuts off his life. And thereby prevents the working out of those samskaras that were released for fructification. Now these samskaras of the balance 20 years, the example is just hypothetical. You're supposed to live for 70 years. You cut short your life at 50. There are 20 more years and so much of samskaras to be yet fructified. But these 20 years ka sanskaras, the samskaras pertaining to these 20 years, now that you do not have a body, may take 200 years or 2000 years, we do not know, because the body is not there. And that's why Baba very emphatically says, never ever to think of committing suicide. All right. When due to untimely death, the sanskaras released for fructification are withheld from expression. You cannot express it because there is no body. The discarnate soul, the soul which has dropped the body, the discarnate soul remains subject to the propelling force of these samskaras even after the physical body has been discarded. We all know there are three bodies: the gross body, the subtle body, and the mental body. The gross body is for expression, for action. The subtle body is what gives you the urja, the energy to use the body. And the mental body has those samskaras in latent form. They are all lying there, they are all stored there. Now what has happened? The gross body is not there. So now the subtle and the mental body, the samskaras are there. So that is why Baba says, the discarnate soul remains subject to the propelling forces. The propelling force is still there of these samskaras even after the physical body has been discarded. The momentum of the samskaras that were prevented from being worked out is retained even in life after death, with the result that the departed spirit greatly desires the things of the gross world. Now these samskaras are all gross: eating, drinking, sleeping, talking, walking, whatever it may be. Now there is no physical body, So now the particular spirit, which Baba calls later on as ghost, is impelled, is pulled towards gross objects and gross world and gross people with the hope of spending and experiencing those pending samskaras which were withheld from expression because of the untimely dropping of the physical form.
Irresistible impulsion. In such cases, the discarnate soul experiences an irresistible impulsion towards the gross world and craves gross objects so badly that it seeks gratification of its desires through the gross bodies of those souls still incarnate. Thus, for example, the discarnate soul may want so much to drink alcohol that it takes to unnatural methods of gratifying the craving. It awaits its opportunity. When it finds someone who is a suitable medium drinking alcohol in the gross world, the spirit satisfies its own desire through that person by possessing his physical body. In the same way, if it wants to experience the gross manifestations of crude anger, it does so through someone in the gross world who is feeling angry.
So in such cases, that means cases where untimely death due to suicide, in such cases, the discarnate soul which has dropped the physical body, experiences an irresistible impulsion toward the gross world and craves gross objects so badly that it seeks gratification of its desires through the gross bodies of those souls still incarnate. Impulsion would mean a very strong pull, a very strong urge, a very strong inciting. So these spirits have no physical body, but they still have the samskaras. So Baba says that in order to fulfill the experience of these samskaras, they in a sense, they possess the bodies of those people who have similar samskaras and satisfy and satiate their desires through possessing of others' body. So here Baba says, thus for example, the discarnate soul may want so much to drink alcohol that it takes to unnatural methods of gratifying the craving. It awaits its opportunity. It will await. For example, if it's a drinking alcohol habit, near the bar, near what we call as mekhana, adda, whatever, it waits there. The spirit waits there. And it finds a suitable medium, person who is having similar samskaras, person who is having a weak mind, person who can be easily captured by the spirit. It will await its opportunity, and then when finds someone who is suitable medium drinking alcohol in the gross world, the spirit satisfies its own desire through that person by possessing his physical body. We had done that earlier. I suppose it was in the beams, that it's a case of one body, multiple souls or many souls. So there are many spirits hanging around different areas and they keep possessing, and they go, the person may not even know, except that his behavior would be something very crude, something not normal or natural. And a third person, when he observes, you say, what is happening to you? Why are you behaving in such a manner? But that person doesn't know that actually he is possessed by some spirit having similar samskaras. In the same way, if it wants to experience the gross manifestation of crude anger, it does so through someone in the gross world who is feeling angry. So somebody has these samskaras of anger, and time again the person gets angry. So these samskaras of the earth-bound soul matches with those samskaras which are unspent of the spirit and ghost, whatever you want to call it. So automatically they match each other, so he would possess that body and express anger through him.
Such souls are constantly waiting to harass incarnate persons with similar sanskaras, and they try to maintain their contact with the gross world through others as long as possible. In life after death, any lingering entanglement with the gross world is a serious hindrance to the natural flow of the soul's onward life. Those who are subject to this precarious condition must be looked upon as particularly unfortunate, since they invite upon themselves and others much unnecessary suffering by seeking unnatural gratification of coarser desires through others who are still incarnate. Compared with these unfortunate souls, the posthumous life of other souls is much smoother.
Sorry. Such souls are constantly waiting to harass incarnate persons who are still in the physical form on earth, to harass incarnate persons with similar samskaras. And that is why, if you do not have very strong desires, very strong urges, very strong coarser samskaras, obviously no spirit would like to come closer to you, near you, because you don't match the samskaras of those disincarnate spirits. And they try to maintain their contact with the gross world through others as long as possible. In life after death, any lingering entanglement with the gross is a serious hindrance to the natural flow of the soul's onward life. What we get to know is any kind of lingering entanglement with anything gross. That is why Baba keeps on telling us that one should be not attached. One should face life in a very unattached manner. If the attachment is too great with anybody or anything, it becomes difficult for the soul to continue its onward journey. So any kind of such lingering entanglement is a serious matter for the soul. In the same way, much of crying and weeping and wailing and all kinds of whatever you call it, display of sorrow and sadness, Baba has said elsewhere that it becomes a hindrance for that particular soul to move on its inward journey, the forward journey. So in other words, what we get to know is, yes, a certain amount of sorrow is but natural, for the simple reason that we are all ignorant. We do not know that the soul who has departed is actually in a much better place, in a much better state. There are no aches and pains, there is no tension, there is no worry. It's moving on. But by our crying and making too much of a sorrow, we are actually pulling that soul or back onto the earth aspect. So in other words, we get to know that a certain amount of sorrow is okay, but not disproportionate sorrow, because that will go against the interest of the departing soul.
A question.
Please.
So, does this mean that...
Okay, I'll repeat your question.
Does this mean that when we do sorrow or when we linger on to that person more, the person's journey to next birth is difficult?
Not to next birth. Baba says that when you express too much of sorrow, disproportionate sorrow, the soul is still hovering around the place of death for about 2 to 3 days, max to max 4 days, and then it moves on. But the soul finds it difficult to move on, because the soul also feels our sorrow, and it just makes the journey more difficult. But not for the next birth. I'm just for transgressing, for going from this earthbound or gross world into the astral or the semi-subtle world, that journey becomes a little difficult. It is something like if somebody is going by train or by plane and you weep and cry, that person also feels, that attachment is there. So that kind of thing. But if you joyfully allow people to go and say, okay, this particular drama, you can say, role playing between husband, wives, children, mother, father, this is a drama after all, that is over. Now you move on and take another role in another drama. So then it becomes very helpful for both the parties. This is how I understand. Okay. So, those who are subject, is a serious matter. I'll just repeat the last. In life after death, any lingering entanglement with the gross world is a serious hindrance to the natural flow of the soul's onward life. Those who are subject to this precarious condition, precarious would mean very dangerous, very risky, uncertain, treacherous, melancholy or menacing. So this very precarious condition must be looked upon as particularly unfortunate. Many times, many people do a lot of so-called bad things, not good things. And people tend to show their anger. So Baba would always say that they need to be pitied because they do not know what they are doing. They think that they are doing something good, but actually that person has to pay for all that nonsense that he or she has been doing. So Baba says that they are to be considered as, looked upon as particularly unfortunate, since they invite upon themselves and others much unnecessary suffering. Baba has said, by seeking unnatural gratification of coarser desires through others who are still incarnate. So those spirits are very unfortunate because they cause trouble for their own self and they cause trouble to the others who are still incarnate. Elsewhere, Baba has said, that it is to suffer in the worst of hell is much better than to be in a state of limbo, what we call as a spirit or as a ghost. Because even in the worst of hell, it is not an eternal damnation. It is not something which is perpetual. After a certain period of time, that soul again gets an opportunity to reincarnate and improve. It may take a few years. We call it earth years. But a person who is spirit, who is a ghost, it is impossible for that soul to be liberated from the place of being a ghost unless and until there is some kind of a grace of a living perfect master or the avatar. Then only he can be liberated from the state of ghost, but he has to again face the hell and then come. So it's the worst situation to be in. Compared with these unfortunate souls, those who have committed suicide and those who are lingering, neither in that world, which is the semi-subtle world, astral world, nor in the gross. They are hanging in between. So compared with these unfortunate souls, the posthumous life of other souls is much smoother. Posthumous means after life, after death. The life of those people, even though they may be in hell, that is much better than this life.
Death begins.
No.
Here.
That's not a
Subtitle.
Is it a
Death begins interval between incarnations. In normal cases, death occurs when all these sanskaras seeking fructification are worked out.
We did that. That normal death happens when everything that you have brought, you have spent, you go back. And there's nothing to be, frankly, there's nothing to be really sorrowful about, except that you miss to see and interact with the physical form. But that if you have that knowledge beforehand, that this is just a form, it is just a temporary association, Baba has said sometimes, that how many husbands you had and how many wives you had, how many hundreds and hundreds of husbands, wives, children, mother-in-law, everything. You don't cry for them because you don't know them. Now you are crying because of some association or what should I say, yes, association for 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. What is there? It is sheer ignorance is what Baba says, because he takes a complete view of the entire creation.
When the soul drops its physical body, it is completely severed from all connections with the gross world, though the ego and the mind are retained with all the impressions accumulated in the earthly career. Unlike the exceptional cases of spirits still obsessed with the gross world, ordinary souls try to reconcile themselves to the severance from the gross world and conform to the limitations of changed conditions. They sink into a state of subjectivity in which a new process begins of mentally reviewing the experiences of the earthly career by reviving the sanskaras connected with them. Thus, death inaugurates a period of comparative rest consisting in a temporary withdrawal from the gross sphere of action. It is the beginning of an interval between the last incarnation and the next.
See how balanced view Baba is showing, that in this we did. In normal cases, that occurs when all the samskaras seeking fructification are worked out. Very simple. When the soul drops its physical body, only the gross body, only the physical body, it is completely severed, separated, cut off from all connections with the gross world. Though the ego and the mind are retained with all the impressions accumulated in the earthly carrier. That means, although we had brought a whole load of samskaras, we have spent the entire load of samskaras, and that's why we are called back home. But in the process of spending samskaras, we have also accumulated and gathered fresh samskaras in the earthly carrier. So the physical body is severed, separated completely, but the subtle body and the mental body continues its journey together with the samskaras which we have gathered or accumulated in the process of spending the past samskaras. I suppose I am making myself very clear. So here, unlike the exceptional cases of spirits still obsessed with the gross world, ordinary souls try to reconcile themselves to the severance means separation from the gross world, and conform to the limitations of changed condition. It is something like you are staying in Mumbai and you go for a change of weather, change of climate to Matharan, Mamaleshwar, whatever.
Mehrabad.
Huh? Mehrabad, okay. No, okay, fine, Mehrabad. And you find you are coming here in the month of winter. Bombay is not very cold. But here you come, you find very much shivering, very much cold. So what do? You conform yourself to the changed situation and the changed scenario. You know that now you have left Mumbai and now you are settled in Mehrabad. So you adjust yourself to that. So most souls, after they drop their physical bodies, they realize that they are no more gross, they are no more connected with the gross world, and they adjust themselves, they conform to the new situation and surrounding, unlike the spirits, unlike the ghosts who cannot do that for the simple reason that those samskaras which they had brought for expending, for spending, for utilizing, for experiencing, they are still there in the subtle and the mental body. Gross is not there. So they cannot get an entry permit in the astral world or semi-subtle world, and they cannot do anything in the gross Because their gross body is not there, so they are in the worst case. There is a worst case scenario. So Baba says, except for them, other souls automatically gets to know that now I am no more physical and adjust itself to the changed situation. And what does it do? Baba says, they sink into a state of subjectivity. It is something like when you are lying on bed doing nothing, what do? You review what you have done in the morning, afternoon, or yesterday. You revive those samskaras. That is the meaning of subjectivity. They sink into a state of subjectivity in which a new process begins of mentally reviewing the experiences of the earthly career by reviving the samskaras connected with them. So in the astral world, semi-subtle world, what do? First step, you accept that you are no more physical, you are no more gross, you have got nothing to do with the gross world, and you adjust yourself to the new environment, to the new situation, and then you sink into subjectivity by reviewing, like how we do when the film is going on, you pause, you again backward, you again see, you are reviewing it at a very comfortable pace. There's no hurry, there's no hush bus, there's no going to office, there's no catching the train or bus. You are reviewing it. First of all, you are reviving it, and then you are reviewing it. Which ones? All the earthly scenario which you have just left. So everything is already recorded like a recording machine in your mental body. So now you access that mental body, the mind, and you review and revive all those scenarios. Okay, I'll repeat. Reviewing the experience of the earthly carrier by reviving the sanskaras connected with them. Now, which are these sanskaras? Those sanskaras that we have accumulated, gathered, amassed in the life which we have just dropped. Not the earlier one, because those have been already spent, and so there is no recollection of that one, but only those things that you have done in this life, they are being reviewed. Thus, that inaugurates a period of comparative rest, consisting in a temporary withdrawal from the gross sphere of action. There is no action required over there. It's a comparative, it's a period of rest. You simply rest. It is the beginning of an interval between the last incarnation, that means between the incarnation which you just dropped and came here, and the next. You have to reincarnate, unless and until we are fortunate to have taken Baba's name and no more reincarnation. The real death is what we call. So here we end this chapter. Now we go to part 2.
Reincarnation and Karma. Part 2, Hell and Heaven. Subjectivity of life after death.
That is the subtitle.
Subtitle. After death, there is no consciousness of the gross world for the ordinary soul, since such consciousness is directly dependent on the physical body. Though the consciousness of the gross world is thus lost, the impressions of the experiences of the gross world are retained in the mental body, and they continue to express themselves through the semi-subtle world. During the interval between death and the next incarnation, the consciousness of the soul is turned towards these impressions, resulting in a vivification of impressions and the revival of corresponding experiences. However, this soul does not become aware of the subtle environment. It is wrapped up in complete subjectivity and absorbed in living through the revived impressions.
So here, in the after-death state, everything is subjective. Everything is reviewed and revived in your mind, number one. You are not in the subtle world, so to speak. There is a gross world, subtle world, mental world. Between the gross world, the sthul jagat, and the subtle world, the shukshma jagat or shukshma bhuvan, there is a very thin line. The lower levels of the subtle, you can say, it is an antechamber. Baba says antechamber of the subtle world, which Baba calls it the semi-subtle world or the astral world. Sorry. Baba gives an explanation of an egg. The shell of the egg is like the gross. The white of the egg is like the subtle. But between the shell and the white, for those who eat eggs, they would have remarked, there is a very thin membrane, a very thin lining, which is neither gross nor subtle, which is neither shell nor the white of the egg. That is the semi-subtle or the astral world in which majority of the souls after dropping the body, disincarnate soul reside. Even this astral world has several layers. So whether you are on a higher layer or on the lower layer, whether you are in the heaven state or the hell state, we'll come to that later, depends upon the quality of the samskaras or impressions which we have gathered in the life which we have just dropped. So your Baba says, after death, there is no consciousness of the gross world. There is no consciousness because gross world is over. The gross body is not there for the ordinary soul. Now for those who are advanced souls, they may be on the higher planes and they may still perhaps continue to have some idea of the gross world. There are, for that matter, I would say those who are perfect. Or there are these spirits who are still, although the body is not there, they are propelled or they are pulled towards the grossness. So we are not talking about those. Baba says ordinary souls do not have the consciousness of the gross world after they die, after they disincarnate. Since such consciousness is directly dependent on the physical body. The physical body is not there. Though the consciousness of the gross world is thus lost, the impressions of the experiences of the gross world are retained in the mental body. See, this is very important. Whatever actions that I am doing now, they are all loaded, they are all recorded, like a gramophone recording, they are all recorded in my mental body. And even though the body is dropped, those impressions or samskaras are still there, they are retained, and they will determine whether we go to hell or heaven. And after they are in a near balanced position, we'll again get a new gross body, and that is known as reincarnation. So here Baba says, though the consciousness of the gross world is thus lost, the impressions of the experiences of the gross world are retained in the mental body, and they continue to express themselves through the semi-subtle world. So through the semi-subtle world, we experience the heaven or hell state. They continue to express themselves. During the interval between death and the next incarnation, the consciousness of the soul is turned toward these impressions, resulting in vivification of vivification means to bring back to life, reviving, to give vigor and vitality to those impressions. Those impressions are only there, but by subjectively we bring back to life as if we are actually living those impressions or samskaras again. So here, these impressions resulting in vivification of impression and the revival of corresponding experiences. This we had done when we were doing God Speaks. When we have the body, the consciousness is focused on the body. Once the body is dropped, the consciousness is focused on the impressions. We had done this for fish, for vegetable, fish, bird, animals, human being. So here also, as long as we are in the body, the consciousness is focused on the body. Once the body is dropped, the consciousness now focuses on the impressions or the samskaras of the actions which I have committed while in the body, this body. Again, I'll repeat this. During the interval between death and the next incarnation, the consciousness of the soul is turned toward these impressions, resulting in a vivification of impressions and the revival of corresponding experiences. There is a revival of corresponding experiences. I am giving life, I am giving vigor to those impressions as if they are happening now. However, the soul does not become aware of the subtle environment. The soul is in the astral world, the semi-subtle world. The soul does not become aware of that environment because the soul is wrapped up in the impressions or samskaras, because it is wrapped up in complete subjectivity and absorbed in living through the revived impression. There also we are living, but living in the revived impression. Subjectivity would mean what I think will come to subjectivity and objectivity later on is there. But that means whatever I am thinking, only I will be experiencing that, not the other soul who is sitting next to me or sleeping next to me. All right.
Hell and heaven states. In life after death, the experiences of pain and pleasure become much more intense than they were in earthly life. These subjective states of intensified suffering and joy are called hell and heaven. Hell and heaven are states of mind. They should not be looked upon as being places. And though subjectively they mean a great deal to the individualized soul, they are both illusions within the greater illusion.
All right. In the life after death, the experiences of pain and pleasure become much more intense than they were in the earthly life. Why? Because in the earthly life, we had a cushion, we had a buffer, we had something that those impressions have to pass through in order to give us the experience. This is the buffer, this is the cushion. Now this buffer or cushion is not there. So they are now directly experiencing subjectivity, either the pleasure of the heaven state or the suffering of the hell state, without the corresponding cushion or buffer. And therefore, it increases, it intensifies manifold, both the happiness, joys, as well as the suffering. These subjective states of intensified suffering. So if somebody were to ask, what is heaven and what is hell? This is perhaps the definition, the best definition. Subjective states of intensified suffering and joy are called hell and heaven. Hell and heaven are states of mind. They are states of mind. When somebody had asked Baba whether they are true, they are real, and Baba said they are as real or as false as the experiences of this world. If you feel that this experience of this gross world is false, then everything in heaven and hell also is false. If you feel this is real, then that is also real. And therefore there are so many books and books written on life after life, life after death, and what a person feels when he is about to die, or he has died and come back again. So they are explaining all the other things. But explaining what? Explaining their own subjectivity, which is in the domain of illusion. Pure, simple illusion. So here Baba says, hell and heaven are states of mind. They should not be looked upon as being places. They are not locations. And though subjectively they mean a great deal to the individualized soul, subjectively the world means a great deal for me, individualized soul, but in reality it's an illusion. But I don't experience this as illusion. So in the same way, Baba says, and though subjectively they mean a great deal to the individualized soul, they are both illusions within the greater illusion, which is called creation. All right? When some jnani was asked, what happens after death? A very superb reply. What happens? The dream continues. This is a dream, and you will continue to dream the dream of heaven or the dream of hell. That's the only difference without the physical body. Yes?
I thought that when you experience something, body is the medium.
Yeah.
So because of the body, it has some threshold. You feel some limited
Exactly. Right.
and
Correct.
happiness.
Correct.
But after the body, after you lost the body, then after that, there is no body, there is no limitation. So you feel extremes.
Correct. Exactly. What Naman is trying to convey is that same thing what we said, that because of the body, the pleasure and the pain gets limited or gets reduced because it's like a buffer, as I said, buffer. But once the body is not there, then it is extreme, the joy as well as the suffering, because this medium is not available to us in the after death state. So they are both illusions within the greater illusion. It's just, so what we get to, what is in it for me? I always think like that. When we are studying all this, what is in it for me? One is not to make much of things. Two, maybe not to have too many desires. Not to have a very strong entanglement with things of the world. To take things very lightly. Not to make a mountain out of a molehill, as they say. And live a detached life. Detached does not mean that you will not love, you will not care, you will not be concerned. You will do exactly what needs to be done. Detachment is a state of mind. Detachment comes from, I would say, knowledge, whereas attachment comes from ignorance. So you know that this association of mind with people, place, around, it's only for a temporary period. Let me associate, let me give my love, let me give my of myself to creation in a detached manner without any sense of attachment. And hopefully, I keep repeating this, everything that we do, it is Baba doing through us, it is Baba doing through us. Constantly Baba is rolling at the back of our mind and hoping that when we breathe our last, Baba comes to our rescue and we just, as I say, pop off to the big pop, capital P, never to come back again. So that should be, this is my own take, that should be our focus in life, not to make too much out of it, not to run after this and that and whatever, because ultimately it's all illusory, nothing can be taken there, we all know that. It's nothing new. We say that when we came, we only brought the body, in a sense. It's a way of looking at it. And when we go, even that body we are going to drop here only. We are not going with the body over there. Of course, we are going in terms of subtle and mental bodies. So that all such, we call it manan, or all such meditation, all such ways of thinking will make our life worth living, which make our life very halka fulka, as they say, very fluffy, enjoying life. And like Baba himself says, enjoy everything, but do not worry. Enjoy everything, but don't be attached to it. So when we do that, by and large, our life is really worth living. Jai Baba.
Fulfillment of desires through thought.
Desires and experience intensified after death.
desires and experiences intensified after death. In the hell state as well as in the heaven state, desires become much more intense since they no longer require expression through the gross medium. Like desires, the experiences incurred in their fulfillment or non-fulfillment also become greatly intensified. In the earthly career, desires as well as the pleasures and the sufferings they bring are experienced through the medium of the gross body. The soul is, of course, actually using its higher bodies at the same time, but in the earthly carrier, its consciousness is bound up with the gross body. Therefore, the processes of consciousness have to pass through an additional veil that lessens their force, liveliness, and intensity, just as rays of light are dimmed when they are required to pass through a thick glass. During habitation in the body, desires and experiences suffer a deterioration in intensity, but when that habitation is given up, they undergo a relative increase of intensity.
Exactly what we discussed. Baba is again saying it in a different language. Desires and experiences intensified after death. Not just the experiences of joy and suffering, but even desires get intensified after death. In the hell state, as well as in the heaven state, desires become much more intense since they no longer require expression through the gross medium. That is why Baba keeps on harping desire for desirelessness, hope to rise above all hope, want nothing and you will have everything. So when we practice that in this world, in the gross world, where you have just few desires, maybe needs and a few more desires, but not intense desires which can make us suffer, because non-fulfillment of desires is one of the precondition of suffering, precursor you can say. So, like desires, the experiences incurred in the fulfillment or non-fulfillment also becomes greatly intensified. In the earthly career, desires as well as the pleasures and the suffering they bring are experienced through the medium of the gross body. See, that's what you said. They are experienced through the medium of the gross body. The soul is, of course, actually using the higher bodies at the same time, which means the soul obviously uses the subtle body for energy and the mental body for thinking, for ideas, for feeling, etc. They are using. 1 minute. The soul is, of course, actually using its higher bodies at the same time, but in the earthly career, its consciousness is bound up with the gross body. Therefore, the process of consciousness have to pass through an additional veil, additional layer, additional veil that lessens their force, which reduces their force, liveliness and intensity, just as rays of light are dimmed when they are required to pass through a thick glass. During habitation in the body, that means we are still alive, desires and experiences suffer a deterioration in intensity. But when the habitation is given up, when we die, when we drop our body, when we disincarnate, they undergo a relative increase of intensity. So, the more the desires here, in a sense, coarser desire, more the suffering in the other world, and vice versa. So that is why we should try to keep our desires as low as possible.
Fulfillment of desires through thought. In the heaven state, the fulfillment of desires is not, as in the gross sphere, dependent upon having the object of desire. Fulfillment of desire comes merely through thinking of the object desired. For example, if a person wishes to hear exquisite music, he experiences this pleasure merely by thinking about it. The imaginative idea of exquisite music becomes, in this state, a substitute for the physical sound vibrations in the gross sphere. The pleasure he desires from the thought of exquisite music is much greater than the pleasure he derived in his earthly career from the actual hearing of physical sounds. In the heaven state, there are no obstacles between desires and their fulfillment. The pleasure of self-fulfillment through thought or feeling is always at hand.
So, in other words, Baba says, here, if I want to satiate any desire, I have to work towards it and get the pleasure of the body. But there is no body. So, just a thought is required and you get intense pleasure out of thinking. But we are talking about the purified desire or pure pleasure. Here Baba says, in the heaven state, the fulfillment of desires is not, as in the gross sphere, dependent upon having the object of desire. Subjective, objective. Object may be anything, For example, let's say even if it is music, I need a harmonium or a tabla or a guitar or a sitar or whatever it is. I need that particular object in order to play or in order to listen to that particular exquisite music. But in the state of heaven, no such gross objects are available. But I can satisfy my desire of listening to exquisite music simply by thinking about it. How easy it has become, how beautiful it is. So Baba says, fulfillment of desires comes merely through thinking of the object of desires. Object desires. Desired. For example, if a person wishes to hear exquisite music, he experiences this pleasure merely by thinking about it. The imaginative idea of exquisite music becomes, in this state, a substitute for the physical sound vibration in the gross sphere. Baba did say that sound in the gross is quite different from sound in the subtle and sound in the mental, and then ultimately the sound of God, you can say, what is it called? Brahmanad, Nad. Yeah, that is such an exquisite music that Baba says you cannot hear only. You will drop your body even if you hear one little, whatever you call it, note of that music. The pleasure he derives from the thought of the music is much greater than the pleasure he derived in his earthly career from the actual hearing of physical sound. In the heaven state, there are no obstacles between desires and their fulfillment. There is no obstacle. Here if I desire something, I have to go out in search of that object which will give me the pleasure. But there is no such obstacle for having pleasure, for fulfilling my desires. All I need to do is rest and think. And the moment I think, that particular desire is fulfilled. In the heaven state, there are no obstacles between desires and their fulfillment. The pleasure of self-fulfillment through thought or feeling is always at hand. They are always available to us. By thinking or by feeling about certain thing, I will get that pleasure.
Heaven on earth. In fact, even in the earthly sphere of existence, some individuals develop this capacity of making their pleasure independent of possession of a gross object. Beethoven, for example, was completely deaf, and yet, through the exercise of imagination alone, he was able to enjoy intensely his own compositions of music. In a sense, even on earth, he might figuratively be said to have been in the heaven state. In the same way, A person who meditates on the beloved with love derives happiness merely through the thought of the beloved without requiring his physical presence. After death, in the heaven state, the enjoyment of such imaginative fulfillment is infinitely greater, since consciousness is then unburdened of the outermost veil of the gross body.
So, in other words, we can also enjoy heaven on earth by increasing our imaginative faculties and not being dependent on the gross object for the fulfillment of our desires. In fact, even in the earthly sphere of existence, some individuals develop this capacity of making their pleasure independent of possession of a gross object. That means, in other words, they do not need the physical presence of the gross object in order to derive the pleasure of fulfillment of those desires. Beethoven, for example, was completely deaf, and yet, through the exercise of imagination alone, he was able to enjoy intensely his own compositions of music. In a sense, even on earth, he might figuratively be said to have been in the heaven state. He was not in the heaven state, he was on earth, but figuratively, we can say that he was in the heaven state. That means not dependent upon gross physical object. In the same way, a person who meditates on the beloved, capital B, that means God, Baba, with love, derives happiness merely through the thought of the beloved without requiring his physical presence. It is said, remembrance, sentence is very nice. Remembrance is a form of meeting. Mostly when we talk about meeting, we talk about gross level meeting where you see the person, shake hands or say Jai Baba, you are meeting. But at a higher level, when you are constantly remembering, thinking about, meditating on your beloved God, you are also, in a sense, in a meeting with Him. So, in other words, remembrance is a form of meeting. It's on a higher plane. So, without the physical presence of your beloved, we can always think about him, we can always remember him, we can always, and get the pleasure or the joy of having met him, of having had a meeting with him. After death, in the heaven state, the enjoyment of such imaginative fulfillment is infinitely greater, since consciousness is then unburdened of the outermost veil of the gross body. There is no burden of the outermost veil of the gross body, and so on a positive side, same way it is with suffering also, on the positive side, your pleasure, your imaginative fulfillment is multiplied manifold.
Coarser desires contribute to hell state. Some desires have a direct relation to the possession and assimilation of gross objects through the gross body. The coarser desires, such as lust, gluttony, or the craving for alcohol or drugs, are of this type. These desires are specifically earthly because they are possessive and they involve an element of clinging to the physical object. In these desires, there is not only a preponderance of sensations derived from contact with the object, but also of those sensations that constitute the response of the body itself. These coarser desires contribute to the hell state.
So there are finer desires and coarser desires, gross desires. thick. So if you have finer desires, like as we did, even on earth, desire to help others, desire for service, desire to contribute to the happiness of others, to be a part of somebody's joy, these are also desires. But they are finer desires, they are purified desires, they are desires which are not selfish, they are not self-centered, they are for the betterment and improvement and care and concern and love for the others. Now, as opposed to that, there are some coarser desires which unfortunately leads to possessiveness and also leads to assimilation. Here Baba says, some desires have a direct relationship to the possession, you want to possess. And assimilation means to seize, to catch on to keep clinging on to that, to integrate that in our own life. An assimilation of gross objects through the gross body. There is this desire to possess gross objects through gross body. That is where you cannot fulfill that in the after-death state, and therefore they lead to the experiences of hell, because you have got such strong desires of possessiveness and of assimilation which you cannot fulfill because the gross object is not available to you. Some desires have direct relations to the possession and assimilation of gross objects through the gross body. The coarser desires, such as, now Baba talks about the desire, lust. Lust always requires the physical form or the physical body of the other. That is not available. Gluttony, you love to eat and eat and eat. That also requires the physical form of food. Or the craving for alcohol or drugs are of this type, that means the coarser desires. These desires are specifically earthly because they are possessive. That's what makes the difference. They are possessive and they involve an element of clinging to the physical object. In these desires, there is not only a preponderance of sensations. Preponderance would mean superiority or dominance of sensations derived from the contact with the object. There is not only that, but also of those sensations that constitute the response of the body itself. It is something like somebody is a chain smoker. Why does a person want to be addicted to smoking or to drinking or to lust? It is because of the bodily sensation that the person gets after consuming or indulging. That aspect, is what makes us cling to those desires. It is not just the object, but also here, very beautifully, I'll just read this again. In these desires, there is not only a preponderance of sensations derived from contact with the object, not only the sensation part, but also of those sensations that constitute the response of the body itself. The body responds to this sensation by telling itself, wow, I feel nice, I feel great, I feel elated, with drugs and with other things. So that means there is an element of possessiveness, there is an element of assimilation, there is an element of my body clinging on to those, and which are not available in hell, in the state of hell. Why hell? In the state of after dropping the body. Now whether you are in heaven or hell will depend upon what is the preponderance of the texture and the quality of your desires. So here Baba says, response of the body itself. These coarser desires contribute to the hell state. What contribute to the hell state? Desires are there, but coarser desires, grosser desires, desires which require the actual physical gross object. If those are not available, then I will feel very much disturbed, perturbed, agitated, and I want it, but I can't have it. And therefore, I experience a state of hell.
Difference between coarser and finer desires. In contrast with the finer desires, the coarser desires place an infinitely heavier premium on mere sensations quite independently of any intellectual meaning or moral value. In the finer desires, such as the desire for music, there is of course an element of wanting sense contact with the physical sounds. But these sounds become important not so much in their own right as in their capacity to express beauty. In the same way, a desire to hear discourses has a hold upon the mind, not so much because of the sensations of sound, but because of the intellectual meaning and emotional appeal they convey.
So here, this is going a little deeper. Let's try to understand. Difference between coarser and finer desires. Desires are there. Even in the heaven state, the desires are there. But those desires are finer desires. There is no element of clinging on. There is no element of assimilation. There is no element of possessiveness. It is not per se that object which is giving us the pleasure, but a different connotation of that object. So let's try to understand. In contrast with the finer desires, the coarser desires place an infinitely heavier premium on mere sensations. In the coarser desire, the predominance, as we did in the earlier paragraph, is that of the sensation. It is sensation, we call it in Hindi perhaps samvedna, which gives us the pleasure. Sensation quite independently of any intellectual meaning or moral value. When we are focused only on sensation, we do not take into consideration, we are quite independent of whether it is morally right or wrong, good or bad, whether it has got, whether intellectually whether that is the right thing to do or not. The focus or the, you can say yes, focus is on the sensation only. I remember once Baba saying, if I remember correctly, that in the last Advent there was a sort of a quantum leap from sensation to reason. Reason would mean what Baba talks about, intellect. From sensation to reason. And now the other jump would be from reason to intuition. So in a sense, many people closer to Baba, you can say, who are closer to Baba, they feel that the gift of the present day avatar to humanity is the gift of intuition. They feel that way, that Baba has come not to teach but to awaken, and awakening obviously means something to do in the inward levels and not the outer level, not teaching through books and all that, but intuitively awaken us to the truth. So that's the thought which many Baba lovers hold. So here it is quite independent of intellectual meaning or moral value. The coarser desire, people following coarser desires are not concerned with morality or whether intellectually what we are doing is right or wrong. In the finer desires, such as the desire for music, there is of course an element of wanting. There is an element of wanting. There is an element of desire, wanting sense contact with the physical sound. In the finer desires also there is a desire. But here Baba says, but these sounds become important not so much in their own right. The sounds per se is not important as in their capacity to express beauty. That means the aspect of sound as sound is not given importance as much as the sound is expressing a certain aspect of beauty. Similarly, Baba says, In the same way, a desire to hear discourses has a hold upon the mind, not so much because of the sensations of sound. A discourse is given how? Somebody speaks, somebody hears. There is a sound passing from the mouth to the ear. So Baba says it is not the sound per se, but because of the intellectual meaning and emotional appeal they convey. So sound is only a carrier which is carrying some emotional appeal or intellectual meaning, and that touches the soul, and that is where the pleasure in the heaven state takes place. That's what Baba beautifully expressed.
Bodily sensations of coarser desires. Thus, in the finer desires, the actual sensations play a subordinate role to the derivative aspects based upon the sensations. In the coarser desires, the chief element is provided by the actual sensations connected with the physical object and the sensations aroused by them through bodily response to their possession. The organic sensations of the physical body play the greatest part in experiences connected with the coarser desires. Through them, the individualized soul feels its own existence as the gross body much more effectively and vividly than through experiences connected with finer desires.
Do the next chapter, okay. Bodily sensations of coarser desires. See, Baba is going so deep into the subject. He says, thus, in the finer desires, the actual sensations play a subordinate role to the derivative aspect. Derivative aspect in that particular case we read is the beauty. The beauty which it conveys through the playing of certain music. So it is not the sound per se, as we say, that is given importance, but the beauty that is being conveyed. Thus, in the finer desires, the actual sensations play a subordinate role to the derivative aspect based upon the sensations. In the coarser desires, now conversely, the chief element is provided by the actual sensations connected with the physical object and the sensations aroused by them through bodily response to their possession. So here in the coarser desires, the importance is given to the sensation which we feel when we indulge in those desires. Not only that, but the body's response to that feeling combined, that is what creates attachment or clinging or assimilation or possessiveness. So Baba says, and that is not available in the after body state, and that is why you suffer the state of hell. I'll repeat this again because it's very, very subtle. In the coarser desires, the chief element is provided by the actual sensations connected with the physical object, and the sensations aroused by them through bodily response to their possession. How the body responds to those sensations, both put together, creates this element of clinging and trying to repeat those experiences or sensations. The organic sensations of the physical body play the greatest part in experiences connected with the coarser desires. The organic response means the physical response. Through them, the individualized soul feels its own existence as the gross body much more effectively and vividly than through the experiences connected with the finer desires. So in other words, my interpretation would be that in finer desires, the grossness is not there, but the, Baba uses a very nice derivative. The derivative, which is the beauty, which is the emotional aspect, which is the intellectual aspect, that takes preponderance. That is important. In the coarser desires, that is kept shunned. That is not important. I want physical sensation. That is given importance. And since physical sensation is not available without a physical body, you experience a state of suffering.
Sufferings of hell and pleasures of heaven. Almost the entire significance of experiences brought about by the fulfillment or non-fulfillment of coarser desires is constituted by the bodily sensations themselves.
That's what we have been repeating. Baba is using the word bodily
Italics.
in italics. That means in the coarser desires, we are not interested in the derivative of beauty, of intellect, of morality, nothing. Bodily sensation only. Go ahead.
Therefore, they can rarely yield the full experience of fulfillment achieved through finer desires merely by the exercise of thought and imagination. It is characteristic of the coarser desires to insist on the possession and assimilation of the gross objects themselves. Any imaginative idea of the gross objects merely serves the purpose of accentuating the urge to reach out to them. Since the gross objects of the coarser desires are not available in the semi-subtle world, these desires are mostly productive of an intensified experience of the suffering of non-fulfillment. Just as in the gross world, the presence of coarser desires leads to the preponderance of suffering over pleasure, in the life after death, the revived experiences connected with these coarser desires also lead to a preponderance of suffering over pleasure, thus bringing into existence the hell state. Similarly, in the life after death, the revived experiences connected with the finer desires lead to a preponderance of pleasure over suffering, thus bringing into existence the heaven state.
Brilliant. What Baba is trying to convey that in the coarser desires, the dependence on the physical gross object which fulfills my desire is not there. Let's say, for example, a drug addict. You have seen, we see even in the gross world, if he does not find the drug for his satiating the desires, satisfaction of his desires, he would go very wild. He would go to any extent of stealing money or stealing the drug or even murdering somebody close in the family in order to find money so that he can satisfy his desire for drugs. And same, drugs is a little on a higher side, same way for alcohol, same way for lust. Same for all the coarser desires. He is not interested, he is not bothered about the intellectuality of it, the morality of it. He wants that physical, gross object to satisfy my desires. And if such desires have been cultivated while in the body, yet in the body, then after you have cultivated, the physical body is dropped, but the impressions connected with those desires are still there. And when we go into the semi-subtle world, the astral world, I cannot fulfill those desires because my total dependence is on the grossness of that object which is not available, because in that world nothing is objective, everything is subjective. And that makes my suffering more accentuated, more intense, because I am unable to get what I want for my satisfaction, because the impressions are still there. They are vibrant, they are wanting me to satiate that particular desire. So now we will be able to understand this much better. Let's read. Almost the entire significance of experience is brought about by the fulfillment or non-fulfillment of coarser desires is constituted by the bodily sensations themselves. That we did. Therefore, they can rarely yield the full experience of fulfillment achieved through finer desires merely by the exercise of thought and imagination. I am thinking that I am drinking beer, whiskey, brandy, rum, whatever. Just that thinking does not satisfy me. Or I am thinking that I am having drug, does not satisfy me. I want the gross object. It is not so for the finer desires. It is characteristic of the coarser desires to insist on the possession and assimilation of the gross objects themselves. Any imaginative idea of the gross objects merely serves the purpose of accentuating, increasing the urge to reach out to them. Since the gross objects of the coarse desires are not available in the semi-subtle world, these desires are mostly productive of an intensified experience of the suffering of non-fulfillment. Just as in the gross world, the presence of coarser desires leads to the preponderance of suffering over pleasure, in the life after death, the revived experiences connected with these coarser desires also lead to a preponderance of suffering over pleasure, thus bringing into existence the hell state. Similarly, in the life after death, the revived experiences connected with the finer desires lead to a preponderance of pleasure over suffering, thus bringing into existence the heaven state. We end here. Any questions? Yeah. How many minutes left? Oh, no, almost 3 minutes. No, I don't want to start a new one. Any very beautifully Baba, see why that's what we did in the very first session, which has not come out in toto for whatever reason in totality, is that the knowledge about after death is very helpful to us, how we can conduct ourselves while we are still alive. It helps us, that knowledge helps us to mold our ways of behavior now when we are still in the physical body. Of course, we all know that death is not the real death. This death is not the real death. But all the same, Baba is giving us the to-do, or you can say, what is it called? DIY kit, do-it-yourself kit, of molding ourselves here so that in case we are not fortunate to really have the real death, at least here we can very comfortably stay in the resort in heaven and then come back all fortified, fresh and invigorated.